Hi.
Hey,
Oh, you can hear me. Okay.
yes.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hello.
We'll give it a few more minutes. It's still a few minutes before 7. Okay, everybody, it is 7 o'clock, and I don't want to take up everybody's time. There might be a few others that join, but we'll get started. Just to let everyone know, I am recording this meeting so that the information that will be presented, we'll be able to put it out on social media, and then other people can view the recording. So I wanted to give a little bit of background about why we're here tonight. It was not prior to the last council election, when Nancy McFarland was mayor. We began a study for Falls of Neuse south of the Neuse River, and the neighbors there they've been concerned over the years about how the area was going to grow and develop. And so a small area study was done and a plan was developed, and the process went very well. There was a steering committee that was formed that consisted of residents from the area, and there were many public meetings. And of course, this was before COVID-19. So all those meetings were in person at Abbott's Creek Community Center, as well as at one of I think it was Durant Middle School across the street. And so a lot of information was gathered, and people were really, I think, pretty happy with the end result, which was a small area plan to help guide development along the Falls of Neuse corridor between the Neuse River and roughly Raven Ridge Road. And so there were a lot of parcels that have the potential of being redeveloped. There are some parcels that have single family homes along Falls of Neuse corridor, but with that road being turned into a 4-lane road, it was expected that over time the owners might sell those properties, and those properties could then be redeveloped. And so the small area plan was created to help provide guidance for how the corridor should be developed. And there was a strong emphasis on maintaining the current character of the corridor, which is really sensitive to the Falls Lake Park and the Falls Lake Dam and the Neuse River Greenway, and as well as the residential character of the area. And that's really what people wanted to see the corridor continue to be developed as time goes on. So as word got out about the that small area plan, people had approached me about having something similar for the rest of Falls of Neuse from the river all the way to Capitol Boulevard. So during the last term, we got approval for some additional money to do a study and create a plan for the Falls of Neuse north of the Neuse River all the way to Capitol. And so that's why we're here tonight, is the plan. And despite COVID, there have been public engagements. And what I'm going to do is turn the meeting over to staff and allow them to give a presentation about the plan to help everyone come up to speed on it if you're not familiar with it. And yeah, because eventually the plan will be coming to council and for council's approval. And so this is just sort of a final checkpoint to make sure that the community is aware of what council is doing and to see if there's any further input from the community about it. So we have several people from staff with us tonight, including Patrick Young, who is the department head for planning and development. And so Patrick, I'll turn the meeting over to you so that you can introduce people.
Thank you, Dr. Cox, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all. Dr. Cox framed out
the purpose and background of the plan very nicely. And I want to recognize my teammates here that have led the development of this plan in close consultation with you and your neighbors over the last year or so. Our project lead is our senior planner, Hannah Reckow, and Hannah will give a overview of the plan development process and plan recommendations. And as Dr. Cox said, we absolutely want to hear your feedback and comments. This is a great time to do that before it goes before the Planning Commission and Council. Also with us is Jason Harden, another one of our senior planners who's worked very closely on this plan and a number of other plans in North and all throughout Raleigh, but particularly in this part of the community. And Christopher Golden, who's our manager over the team, comprehensive planning team that Jason and Hannah work on. So I'll turn it over to Hannah, and then we'll certainly, most importantly, after she has a brief presentation, we'll turn it over to you all. We're here to answer your questions, hear your concerns, and provide and hear your feedback and input. So thank you, Dr. Cox. Thank you, friends and neighbors in Wakefield, and I'll turn it over to Hannah.
And hopefully we won't have too many technical snafus with Zoom.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I will share my screen. I do have a few slides. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. So for introductions of the staff who's here, I'm gonna, as I mentioned, give a kind of brief overview of the project, the process thus far, and I spend the majority of my time talking about the draft recommendations, and then leave plenty of time for your questions and comments. So first of all, what is the study? So the Wakefield Small Area Study, as was outlined, is like all small areas plans, is focused on a smaller area of Raleigh. So in this case, it's a subset of corridors and some kind of commercial areas, and it's focused on planning topics that sort of affect the built environment and quality of life and future development. Small area studies will typically look at kind of a variety of topics, although as you'll see, transportation rose to the top as a main topic of interest when we talk to the community, and is the topic of kind of majority of the recommendations. And then small area plans will often identify projects, but they're not in themselves a development project. Typically create policy guidance that sort of records the community desires and is considered by council at future decisions. Dr. Cox laid out some of the history of this. This area plan was budgeted in the last fiscal year. The Falls North study, which is the image on the right, took place, was adopted in 2019, and looked at a portion of Falls of Neuse Road up to the river. And then this Wakefield study picks up that study area right at the river and goes north. So this is the study area. Follows Falls of Neuse Road up to Capitol Boulevard, and then also captures Wakefield Pines Drive, Forest Pines Drive, Common Oaks Drive, and then some of the commercial and mixed use areas around these corridors. So I mentioned that area plan is sort of a process of more focused public engagement. So what does that look like up till now? There's been several phases of the study over the last couple months, each generally moving from more big picture ideas to specific recommendations. So the first phase occurred in April and May of this year, and it was about understanding the study area, understanding what the issues and the opportunities are. We heard from over 250 people in an online survey, and around 50 people through a virtual event that phase, and a lot of really great information about the specific issues people are seeing, and the resources in the area that they value. And then the second phase, which took place in June, compiled all our research, asked some follow-up questions in the community to try to point towards specific recommendations, try to get one level more detailed. And we did that through an online open house, which we had about 90 participants in that. And then that feedback is compiled into the draft recommendations, which review of those is ongoing right now. What's left in the sort of big picture process would be review by City Council and Planning Commission. And both those phases include at least one public meeting to discuss the plan. And then, as was mentioned, the final decision is with City Council. So engagement is obviously really important to a small area plan. I did want to take a moment just to talk through our approach to engagement. This study got started and will likely end entirely during the pandemic. So our approach was centered around virtual and online means of connecting with the community as a safe and comfortable way to do that. So we held some online events, had online surveys, and one online open house as kind of the key events of the study. And then multiple ways that we tried to get the word out included postal mail, our email list through the Gov delivery to sign up for project updates, and then social media accounts. And then last but definitely not least was early on in the process, we got connected with some stakeholder groups who were very kind in offering us their kind of extended network to help get the word out. So, the YMCA, the schools, and HOAs especially really helped with that engagement. And then sort of really briefly, just to give a small look, this is some of the feedback we got from the first survey, sort of summarized on this slide. The key concerns we heard were about safety of walking, biking in the area, speeding, concern over traffic, and the impacts of additional development, and then impacts of tree loss. And then the two word clouds you see are from questions where we asked about, what makes this area special to you, and what's your sort of vision for the future of Wakefield area. The larger the word, the more times we heard that word, and I think this really clearly illustrates exactly what was valuable in the area to the community. So I will jump right into the recommendations. There's 3 topics I'm going to cover. As I mentioned, because of a lot of the comments we heard, so the bulk of the recommendations are transportation focused, but I'll also touch on the stormwater management options, the recommendations, and then some thoughts on the land use. In addition to the information that the community shared about the issues they see in terms of traffic and speeding and all that, the consultant team also did some investigations regarding transportation issues. So that included some site visits and observations of things like school queuing near the schools, speeding, as well as a multimodal level of service analysis and this preferred access plan. And so the sort of mobility focused recommendations identify areas where high quality intersections, additional crossings, greenway and bike connections could improve safety of walking and biking in the area and encourage slower speeds by drivers. So I'll go through these. We'll start on Wakefield Pines Drive near the high school. This is an image of a crossing, not an intersection, it's called mid-block crossing, what it looks like now, and a conceptual image that shows what a mid-block, we'll call a hawk signal would look like. So this is a light basically for pedestrians. So students or parents or other people wanting to cross could press the button, get the signal to cross safely. And then some other features of this might be additional median plantings to make that feel safer, and then pedestrian level lighting. So one of the things we heard in our surveys were how valued the greenways are in the area, both as a recreational resource, as a way to connect with the natural resources in the area, and as one of the preferred ways to travel around by bike. So the study recommendations include an increase in connections of greenways for both recreation and transportation. So this map shows those routes. The solid green lines are existing greenways, and then the dotted lines are proposed facilities. So starting at the river, going north on Falls of Neuse, there would be a side path on either side. And then farther north, a multi-use path located in the median, and then a proposed greenway along Richland Creek to the north, and then crossing Falls of Neuse south, ideally connecting to the existing Falls Neuse River Greenway to the south. And a key piece of this, what would make this network work, is safe crossings of some of the major roads like Falls of Neuse. So one recommendation is to cross Falls of Neuse using an underpass. So this is an image of the existing conditions under Falls of Neuse Road. The project team looked at the feasibility of using the existing space there for that greenway connection. So another sort of conceptual image of what that might look like. Obviously, we'd have all the necessary safety features, we'd have lighting, and then there'd be an opportunity for additional plantings, and even potentially art in the underpass space. Another important crossing would be to the median multi-use path. So this is farther south on Falls of Neuse Road. It's an image of what that looks like right now. So a small sidewalk on the side, but mainly a roadway. Another rendering, this also has a pedestrian light for crossings and pedestrian scale lighting, and then an opportunity for some riparian buffer plantings or other features to help absorb stormwater. And then a similar look at bike connections. This map shows the existing bike lanes in the solid black lines, and then the dotted lines of proposed facilities. So the red, may be hard to see, the red dotted lines are proposed signed bikeway. So those are mostly on neighborhood streets, connecting to some of the bigger corridors in the area. And then the black dotted lines are proposed separated bike lanes. So you see those on Wakefield Crossings Drive, and then parts of Common Oaks and Wakefield Commons Drive that connect up to some of the existing facilities. So this is a cross section of what that might look like on Common Oaks Drive. The road is already fairly wide, so there wouldn't necessarily be a need to widen the road, but add a bike lane and going in either direction with a buffered area or with space for some vertical buffering. So that would be something called a bollard or an armadillo. They sort of add a little bit of physical separation from the travel lanes. And then that leaves sort of a standard travel lane for drivers, but it is a smaller lane size that you typically see encouraging slower speeds than a much wider lane. So this is what this section currently looks like on Common Oaks Drive. There is a bike lane with a painted buffer. You can see how that might look with adding the sort of vertical separation between the bike lane and the travel lane. And then another example of that on Falls of Neuse Road. This is right north of the river where the study is recommending the side path. So you can see sort of a wider path on one side for people walking and biking, and then some vertical separation with this kind of higher speed section of the road. And then some examples of other features like lighting, signage, landscaping that is acting as kind of a gateway feature for the area. Sort of signifying that this is a community and it's a destination rather than just a place one drives through. Another look at farther north on Falls of Neuse. So we mentioned the multi-use path that could fit in the median. This is another case where the road width doesn't need to change to accommodate this recommendation. There is sort of space enough existing in that median. You can see kind of what that would look like on the bottom image there. And then some additional recommendations for how to improve safety of the crossing include extending the medians a little bit past the crosswalk to add some separation there. And then there's ways also to design the crosswalk, angle it in a way that improves visibility between drivers and pedestrians. So that wraps up sort of the overview of the mobility focused recommendations. The study also found, as I'm sure you saw in this with those word clouds, the natural resources of the area are really highly valued by the community. So study acknowledges, recommendations acknowledge that any opportunity to restore streams, preserve river buffers is highly desirable. And recommendations also identify some variety of stormwater control measures that could be used in the area to improve water quality. These obviously would depend highly on the specific site. You want to use the right facility for the right site. But they could include things like constructing wetlands, permeable pavement, bioswales, things of that nature. So the last topic covers land use. There are no direct recommendations for land use, but I will walk through kind of what the project team's investigations were over the course of the study and how we arrived where we did. So first, this is the existing zoning on the zoning map for the study area. We heard very early on that the community had concerns about new development affecting traffic in the area, and there wasn't an interest in seeing intensity increase at all. Another finding, is that the study area is pretty well built out. This is showing existing development with vacant or unimproved in green. You can see really one property that isn't developed or have something in the pipeline. But also we did hear early on that in the first survey that there was some interest in, if areas did redevelop in the future, that folks would like to see that be more of a walkable type of development rather than a car-oriented development. So that was interesting feedback to get in that phase. The next iteration, the project team looked at how a potential sort of retrofit of maybe one of the shopping centers might happen. There are some precedents of that type of development in the country, including in the Southeast. How would that be feasible? Knowing something like that would be led by private development, how might that come about? Apologize for all the text on this slide, but the finding sort of at the end was that the type of development needed for that type of retrofit might not happen so soon. And so not wanting to mislead with the recommendation, decided to not include one for land use. Part of this is sort of the newness of the development in the area. You typically don't see an interest in redeveloping properties that have been developed fairly recently, haven't sort of lived out their life yet. And then part is also that the study area is in the Richland Creek watershed area, and that's an area that has very strong protections for tree cover. And the current development we see in the area already meets those standards, so it's maybe unlikely that footprints would change all that much. And so that's sort of how we arrived at not issuing any sort of additional recommendations beyond the existing future land use map guidance for the area. So how would all this be implemented? I can speak to that briefly. If once adopted, in whatever form is adopted, that gets integrated into the comprehensive plan. So a new section of area-specific guidance specific to Wakefield would be adopted into the comprehensive plan. And then some of these additional specific recommendations for greenways, bike facilities, pedestrian-related recommendations would also be incorporated into the relevant plans that parks and Raleigh DOT have. And then capital projects that are, any capital projects that are identified by this project would be considered and prioritized as this funding becomes available. And then that's sort of the wrap up of the recommendations. Just a brief forecast of what comes next. Project team will incorporate all of this latest phase of engagement into a draft project report, present that to the City Council. The City Council typically refers that review of that plan to the Planning Commission to sort of review and issue a recommendation about whether to adopt, and then final decision comes back to the City Council for a final vote. So I can stop talking now and be happy to answer any questions.
So nobody has well, only a few people have a video on, so I can't see if you raise a hand.
Okay, well, I just turned, I don't know where it is. You still have your slides up, so you have to, there you go. All right. I'm gonna raise my hand because
Okay, Chris.
you see me. And since you're Dr. Cox, I'll be Dr. Dorr too. Kind of emphasize what Dr. Jill Bryden has gone through. We're supposed to humbly not use our doctorates when we have PhDs. In any case, I really, planners plan. I understand that you've been given a job, you have to plan stuff. So that's what you have. And I respect that. Probably the biggest question that I've asked before and have to ask now is, because there are at least several areas that haven't been completed on the agenda for Wakefield, like our park and like our Wakefield Greenway itself. It dead ends because there's a little problem there that never was fixed. So it dead ends and doesn't connect to New Falls of the News. I mean, these things haven't been finished. So I'm a little confused about taking this whole proposal to the council, essentially asking for money to, I guess, do this stuff that you have when these other things haven't been completed. That's my kind of number one confusion about it. But I mean, the plans are great. I'm glad that you put off the idea of the sort of making walking village areas and so forth. That certainly isn't, again, nice idea, but not maybe a priority. So that's my main question is the money, and why can't we finish the things that we have first? And simply the city taking responsibility that the city already has for just cleaning up the sides of New Falls of the News is a mess in the areas that the HOA hasn't taken care of. You get beyond that where the drainage areas are and so forth. It's all just overgrown. Sidewalks are a mess, and again, that would be just a priority, just to do the things that need to be done before some of the more abstract and conceptual ideas about planning. So thank you.
I can address a couple of your concerns. First of all, don't confuse the small area plan with priorities. Okay, so the idea and also the plan, if you look at the boundary areas, the boundaries are really about development along Falls of News, and so the boundary does not extend all the way to Forest Ridge Park. Now, Forest Ridge Park is important, but that's something that would have to be taken up as a separate issue and as a separate priority. And as far as other areas that have been identified, like the incomplete Greenway, don't think that what you're seeing in these slides represents something that's going to take precedence or priority over those other issues. It's just that these would be incorporated into the comprehensive plan, and then if these items come up in the future, then whoever is running the show at that time can look at these and say, well, okay, 5 years ago, this is what was envisioned. And so we have a good starting point about what needs to be done at that time. So that's really what the plan is about. It is about planning, but it's not about budgeting projects at this point in time.
So what ultimately would be if this is presented, does that, and it's voted on and then it's successful, does it mean it's going to happen, or is it just put in a docket for sometime down?
Right now, it'd be put into a docket for sometime down in the future. But for example, some of these things would be put into the planning of greenways in the future greenways and bike paths. And so when it comes time to be able to allocate future funding to those kinds of projects, these will have been identified and already incorporated into the city's plans, say for bike lanes, for example.
Mhm.
Or additional connectivity for the greenways is another. Another is, let's say we have another transportation bond, and we will at some point, for making road improvements. Funding for those crosswalks with the signals would come out of there. These would have already been identified and incorporated into future transportation plans. And so when that money becomes available through a transportation bond, then these can be given priority because they have been identified.
I see. So the real objective of this kind of small planning overview is to simply get it focused into the cycle of projects.
That's right. That's right. And eventually, when those projects do come to fruition, we have a basis for justifying the expense, say for signalized crosswalks across falls of use, for example, because that will have already been envisioned and adopted by City Council.
Okay, so what can we do about getting some of this sort of immediate cleanup things done that are just basic? Is that
Well, I don't want to sidetrack the meeting too much,
Yeah.
but one of the things I can tell you is I am working with the transportation department to identify, in addition to the HOA, I understand that there was an agreement at one time with Wakefield Commons, with the shopping plaza, to maintain the median and the easements along the side of the road up there. But for whatever reason, they're not honoring whatever agreement that was. So I'm trying to understand what agreements were in place, whether or not they're enforceable, and trying to come up with a plan for more robust maintenance of the medians and the sides of the roads in order to keep them mowed and to keep the bushes trimmed, so that this can be an area that we can be proud of. I know that it's done in Cary. You go over to Cary, you never see a blade of grass out of place over there. So we should be able to do it in Raleigh. And but again, you could say that should be part of this plan, is to plan for the maintenance of the road. And it's not just the maintenance of the medians, it's also dealing with issues like at the bridge where there's that dip in the bridge that needs to be addressed. So what I'll do is I'll make a note of that and see if maybe we can incorporate any of these into the small area plan as priorities.
Mhm. One last comment, and I won't say anything else. The gateway feature, just to comment on that, and I did talk to Hannah about that separately in a conversation. When Wakefield developers left developing, all they had put in was what was their main entrance at that time, is on Old Falls.
Yeah.
Where the clubhouse is. There were no other entrances. So the HOA over the years was left with trying to create entrances, and it is the citizens of Wakefield that built the monuments that are there now. They were not put in by the developers.
Mhm.
And at that time, when I was on the HOA, we went as far as we could. So I just want to acknowledge that we presented a gateway. We do certainly like the idea, needed the idea. That would have to be developed, and in the future, if it is, I would ask that it would be worked on with the HOA
Absolutely.
and with the citizens, and not be a City of Raleigh project, because there's a consistency in style, in design, that should be maintained. You know, whether we all like it or not doesn't matter. It's functionally, as a designer, it needs to be consistent forward in time. Thank you. I won't.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's good input, and what I can do is that in that section of the plan, maybe we can add some language there to say that you know, any gateway feature would be developed in cooperation with the Wakefield community. Okay, anyone else have any questions? Yes, Veronica, there you go.
Hi, thank you guys so much for putting this together. The presentation is helpful after having gone through the PowerPoint too. I did have a couple of questions. One is, what constitutes a high quality intersection? I know there's at least one place that's like a particularly dangerous intersection that looks like it's being identified for high quality, but not necessarily a new light. And so I was just curious, like, what does that look like?
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Go
Oh.
ahead. I don't know who wants to take that.
I was just gonna say my understanding of what high quality intersection means is one where there's sort of full movements for pedestrians, so you can cross, you're not limited to crossing in one direction, and there's light, pedestrian light there as well.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then knowing that this is sort of the plan to get in line with, and with the other plans, is there like a normal timeline or an average timeline? I'm 4 years into living in Raleigh, and we love this community, and I'm like really, I get really excited to see especially like the Greenway extensions that are here. So curious about, is this like a 10 years from now? Is this like a 5 years from now? What's normal, I guess, in this scenario?
Well, assuming the plan is adopted by council, then these ideas would be taken into consideration by the various city departments when they plan their budgets and what they want to do in the coming years. At this point, I cannot really predict how far down. Is it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road? A lot of it depends on the priorities in the city and how much tax dollars that the city has, and as well as bond money. Some of these, like I said, mentioned with the signalized intersections and crosswalks, that could very well and most likely would depend on how much transportation bond money is available and whether or not any of that money is earmarked for these kinds of projects. Same way with greenways. We get these identified, then the question is, how do we build our greenways? And a lot of times that's also done through a parks bond. And we are talking about a $200 million parks bond being on the ballot in 2022. And I keep encouraging on social media, and I'll do it here again, is to for people in the Wakefield area to really lobby hard with the mayor and the at-large council members to get their support for more money for our parks in North Raleigh. Because currently the parks bond does not have money for Forest Ridge Park, and it does not have money, it certainly would not have money for this vision for extending the greenways in this area. Unfortunately, most of the money is going to districts D and C, and of course, Dix Park is the elephant in the room. So a large amount of money is going to Dix Park, but that shouldn't mean that we shouldn't have funding for North Raleigh. But the only way to get money is if people really make their voices heard and really lobby hard to get support on council, because it takes 5 votes in order to get these things. And I will certainly do my part, you know, as a representative on council for this area.
Thank you.
Question to follow up on that. What about ARPA?
ARPA?
Yeah, are there any ARPA funds that are coming down that could be potentially tapped by these organizations that need to budget
Well,
for projects like this? I mean, that could be
potentially,
acceleration, right?
well, there's two buckets. There's the Rescue Act funds, and there are some strings attached with that about how it can be used. And then there are, and this hasn't been passed by Congress yet, are infrastructure funds. And it remains to be seen what strings will be attached to those as well. I mean, certainly infrastructure funds would be used for things like road construction, but the question is it going to be, can we use them for road maintenance? Can we use them for greenways? Can we use it for, or is it for new road construction? That all remains to be seen. But there is going to be, I mean, the city is receiving some $70 million in ARPA funds, and
Right.
we've only been talking about the first half of those funds, so there's still quite a bit of money left over. Now, whether or not we would actually be able to use them for some of these things, that's something I can go back to the city manager and ask about that. But
Thank you.
this is definitely the feedback that I need. And again, in order to get those funds, we need to get 5 votes on council. So I will definitely need the community's help in lobbying the mayor and the at-large council members to provide support for that.
Yeah, I'll have to find out what their contact info is.
Yep. Just look on the city website, you'll find it.
Oh man, that doesn't always, their emails aren't always up to date. I've tried a little bit of that. I do have another question for you, David.
Okay.
I saw some changes. I was able to listen to the recording of the first meeting, which, like Veronica mentioned, a lot of this stuff is really awesome, and really excited about it. Would love to do whatever we can to make it happen. But what I heard some others talk about in the last meeting, there's been some changes in what we've seen. The one change I haven't seen this far in this version of the plan that you guys have shared is anything regarding police. So are there any recommendations in the study around increasing the police presence for our neighborhood, or is there a way for us to still kind of make some adjustments there? Because I think, having talked to a lot of the people at the neighborhood pool, me and my wife are at the pool a lot, and a lot of the neighbors expressed interest in increasing the police presence in the neighborhood as well.
Yes, again, that would be one of the issues that would be handled separately from this. This is really about growth and development and planning for growth and development. Now, you can argue that police should be considered as part of that. And I can have an offline discussion with Patrick Young about that. And for example, should we have a police station located in the area? And of course, that all goes back to RPD as well as to what their planning is. But I hear you, and I hear that a lot, that our police officers, one, we're short-staffed. We're down, from last I knew, down 100 officers from the 800 that we really would like to have for the city of Raleigh. So we're struggling in terms of hiring officers. And then, of course, many times officers are patrolling other areas of the city and not so much our area. And that is a concern. And it's a concern, maybe not so much because of crime, because we're a relatively low crime area, but it's also in terms of traffic enforcement and making sure that, for example, even having officers to patrol our greenways to make sure our greenways are safe. Those are all issues. And if we were our own community, we would have our own little police force, and it wouldn't be an issue. But we're really contending with the larger city and other priorities at this point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Mary's had her hand up for a little while now.
Okay,
She gets a word in.
there it is. I see it. Go right ahead, Mary.
Hi. I had a question about, first of all, I want to thank all of you for taking the time out to do this and to have Wakefield in your minds for some programs that would be beneficial for us. The only two things that I saw, well, my two things that I'm most interested in is the impact of developing more on this Falls of the Neuse corridor, and also deforestation, I guess you could call it, of the area. And I don't see any of that mentioned in any of this with, developing greenways and everything. It's lovely, and walkways and lights and everything. But how is development being mentioned or managed with this recommendation?
I think your point is well taken, Mary, and I think that one of the things that that is missing from the plan is language that would help to preserve the trees and vegetation that we currently see along Falls of Neuse. So, for example, Wakefield Commons, even though that's a new plaza, if it were to be redeveloped, so one of the questions would be, would we lose those trees and vegetation along Falls of Neuse corridor in order to provide greater visibility to, say, a future shopping center? And I think that, what I've been hearing pretty regularly from people in the area is that they don't want to lose that parkway buffer along Falls of Neuse Road, and they don't want to lose the current, what the Wakefield developers had already put in place, which is the extensive vegetation along Falls of Neuse. And so I will make a note to talk to Mr. Young about that and see if we can get some language incorporated into the plan that would, even though we might not have specific land use policies, but at least maybe having a policy that would preserve that extensive vegetation in the future.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Cox, certainly happy to do that. Hannah, do your teammate want to talk about, I know you all looked at that issue some, and you want to spend just a minute talking about the results of your findings of your study and the conversation with the community.
With regards to tree cover or land use in general?
Tree preservation and replacement, particularly along the major corridors, basically ensuring that the high quality parkway style buffer that was installed by the original developers has a basis as redevelopment occurs.
Yeah. So as I kind of mentioned in the presentation, there was a little bit of investigation. The one happened that went into about kind of balancing a trade-off between changing the type of development we see in the future to something more walkable, and the existing tree cover regulations. Those are, so it's a high standard, and it's like rightfully so in this area. And the finding was that the current footprint is really likely to be maintained even if things get redeveloped. So it seemed appropriate to let the tree cover regulations sort of lead in that regard.
But I think from what I'm hearing from the community is that the tree cover regulations are good. But I think as far as a planning document is concerned, particularly when we're seeing more and more out-of-state developers coming into the area to redevelop properties, they don't necessarily respect what has been here and what people consider a priority. So I really think it would be good to take this feedback and maybe add some language to say that one of the things we want to do is to preserve the original vegetative buffers and trees that were put in place by the Wakefield developers.
I understand, yeah.
Okay.
Certainly.
Does anyone else have any questions? All right, then. We will wrap it up then for tonight. I thank all of you for participating and joining in this meeting.
Oh, I
I'm
did
just going to look at the chat window real quick before we leave.
I was gonna say, I just saw one additional question. There might be more coming in. That was about regarding
Well,
steps.
I can just
Um,
go through them one at a time here. So one of the questions is it possible to extend the Wake Forest Loop or other bus to the Food Lion Shopping Center? And so what we'll have to do is I'll have to take that question back to staff because I'm not real clear what the route is for the Wake Forest Loop, and ask that question. Let's see, I don't see anything that addresses most of our concerns. The two big ones for the Falls and News Corridor is traffic and overdevelopment on Falls. I think with traffic, some of that is going to be mitigated when Capitol Boulevard goes to a thoroughfare or freeway, and the intersections are eliminated and replaced with overpasses and underpasses. And then I also think that some of the traffic could be mitigated in the future with a plan to widen 98 to 4 lanes that would provide an alternative to 540 for east-west traffic. And I think if those two things are done, then I think that would help to mitigate the traffic on Falls of News, particularly as north of us becomes more and more developed. We have to provide alternatives to those moving in north of us, so they don't necessarily all come down Falls of News to get to 540, which is already too congested with traffic. And I particularly think the 98 widening is critical to that in order to keep 540 from becoming gridlocked. Let's see. Wake Forest Loop is run by Wake Forest, but my understanding is that the Wake Transit Plan includes the extension of 30-minute service to this portion of Falls and News Road. Again, I'm assuming that's a question, and that's something I will have to look into. And then we've got a resource to ARPA. And let's see, council contact information.
Yeah, Dr. Cox, some of those were things that staff provided on there to try to
Yeah.
support some of the comments from the conversation.
And then the last one was, is it planned far in the future? Can we get something sooner by including in this plan? It doesn't have to be WFL, but we need access to public transportation in the southern part of Wakefield. And again, this is a plan that is looking more in terms of infrastructure and in terms of transit and public transportation. Those are issues that we're going to have to take back to the transportation department and see if we can incorporate them in the future plans for transit in Raleigh. Okay, that's it for the chat window. I'm trying to see. I don't see any other hands up. What I will say is that, cross my fingers, I've recorded this meeting, and then I will put the video out on probably YouTube and post links to it so that more people in the community can view this presentation. I think it was a great presentation. I want to thank Hannah and Patrick and the rest of the staff for participating, and really appreciate that. And yeah, I wish it weren't COVID season again. It would have been nice to get together with everybody. And but thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Dr. Cox, and thank you, neighbors, for taking your time out to talk about this plan with us.
Thanks,
Good night, everybody.